Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the grand hall, hands clenched so tight his nails bit into his palm, watching the woman he had once called his entire world. Celine's laughter carried across the marble floor, sharp and glittering, as she leaned in close to Cor Wilde, her co-worker, her secret, her lover. Ethan heard it, clear as a slap. "If I'd met you before Ethan, I never would have married him." And then Cor's low, smug reply, "I don't think he'd bother us anyway." Ethan didn't move, not when the words hit like a knife under the ribs, not when Celine brushed Cor's arm like it was the most natural thing in the world, not when the room spun with the weight of 20 years, shattered in a single moment. He turned, quietly, not a word, not a scene. He walked past the cameras, past the black tie crowd, past the marble and crystal and champagne, straight into the night, leaving behind a marriage that had already left him long ago. And as he drove home, something inside him snapped clean. I am done saving people who set fire to the house. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Ethan Cole had always believed that some betrayals come loud, like a slammed door or a shouted confession. But when it happened to him, it was quiet. So quiet, it almost sounded like love. He stood at the edge of the Beverly Hills Grand Pavilion, invisible in a crowd of 200. Crystal chandeliers glinted above. Champagne flutes chimed. Designer heels tapped against the marble floor, and cameras flashed in lazy waves over the crowd. Ethan had slipped away from a conversation about medical startups and biotech patents, scanning the room for his wife, Celine Virelli. He hadn't expected to find her like this. There she was. Celine, beautiful, magnetic, radiant in a silver gown that clung to her like light itself, stood too close to Cor Wilde, the young, sharp-jawed co-worker she had been mentioning more and more these days. Cor leaned in, laughing, brushing her shoulder, and Celine tilted her head back, eyes half-lidded, the champagne in her hand swaying with the slow ease of someone who had just enough to let the truth slip. Ethan didn't mean to listen, but he heard it anyway. "If I'd met you before, Ethan," Celine purred, the words as soft as silk and twice as cutting, "I never would have married him." A beat. And then Cor's low reply, almost a whisper, "I don't think he'd bother us anyway." Ethan felt it, not like an explosion, but like something breaking clean inside him. A thin, precise fracture running straight through the foundation of his life. He didn't make a scene, didn't rush across the floor, didn't grab her arm, didn't punch Cor in his smirking mouth, though for a moment his hand curled into a tight fist at his side. Instead, Ethan turned. He walked, past the velvet ropes, past the valet station where Lamborghinis and Bentleys idled, past the shallow crowd of influencers posing under floral arches. His polished shoes tapped quietly against the stone steps, measured, deliberate, as if nothing had happened. He reached his Bentley and drove home in silence. The night air sliced cold through the rolled-down window. Inside, his chest was burning. But Ethan Cole had been a man of control his entire life, and he wasn't about to lose that now, not even for the woman he had once called his entire world. The house in Bel Air sat dark and quiet when he pulled into the driveway. Inside, Nova's nightlight glowed under her door, casting soft stars on the hallway walls. Ethan paused there, his hand resting on the frame for a moment, listening to the small, steady breath of his 7-year-old daughter. A reminder of what mattered, of what still needed him to stand straight, even now. In the kitchen, Celine's second phone buzzed on the marble counter, a device she claimed was for work only, though Ethan had long stopped believing in those distinctions. He didn't touch it, didn't need to. It lit up once. A selfie. Celine and Cor, cheek to cheek, smiling. Captioned, "Best night ever." Ethan exhaled through his nose, a sharp, measured breath. Then he moved through the house slowly, mechanically. Jacket off. Cufflinks placed carefully on the dresser, watch set down on the nightstand. Shoes lined up perfectly, not because he was fine, but because order was the only thing holding him upright. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the darkened window. The city lights spread out below like a mirror of stars. He had given this woman 20 years. He had given her his loyalty, his trust, his quiet love, the kind that doesn't come with fireworks or declarations, but with constancy. And she had reached for the first spark that glittered nearby, as if that were what she'd been missing all along. In the morning, Nova's voice pulled him back. "Daddy, can you braid my hair?" she asked, small arms wrapping around his waist as he sipped cold coffee in the kitchen. He turned, crouched, kissed the top of her head. "Of course, Angel." Celine wasn't home. Ethan didn't ask why. He took Nova to school, holding her hand as she skipped toward the car, chattering about her science project. To her, the world was still safe, still whole, and for her, Ethan decided in that moment it would stay that way. Whatever else broke around them, Nova would not be the collateral. When Celine walked through the door that afternoon, sunglasses on, hair freshly styled, phone in hand, she kissed Nova lightly on the forehead, barely glancing at Ethan. "Big meeting," she murmured. Ethan nodded once, lips pressed in a thin line. He watched her move through the house he had built, the home she now treated like a hotel room, and felt the knot in his chest tighten, harden. That night, after Nova was asleep, Ethan stood in his study, staring out at the dark hills. He dialed one number. Ellis Varyn picked up on the second ring. "Ellis," Ethan said quietly, "I need you to follow Celine." There was a pause. Then Ellis's calm, steady voice came through. "Understood." Nothing more. Ethan hung up, set the phone down gently on the desk, and pressed his hands flat against the cool wood surface. He thought back to the gala, to the way Cor had touched Celine's arm, to the way she had let herself lean in. He thought about all the late nights, all the business trips, all the, "You're just being paranoid, Ethan," and "It's nothing, Ethan," and "You should trust me, Ethan." And somewhere deep inside him, the last thin thread of illusion snapped. In bed, Celine rolled away from him, her hair spilling across the pillow, her breathing soft and even. To anyone else, it would look like peace. But Ethan knew. He lay awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He knew. This wasn't a single affair. This wasn't a mistake. This was the end of the marriage they had both already left, just not at the same time. And now, he wasn't just a husband. He was a man waiting to reclaim his life. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The morning light stretched thin across the marble floors of Ethan Cole's Bel Air home, but he barely noticed it. He moved through the kitchen with the smooth efficiency of a man on autopilot. Fresh orange juice poured into Nova's cup, toast carefully buttered, a hand brushing lightly over her hair as she packed her school bag. "Daddy, can you help with the shoelace?" Nova asked, lifting her foot with a smile. "Of course," Ethan murmured, crouching to tie it. The sweetness of her voice cut him deeper than any adult's betrayal could. His fingers were steady as they looped the laces, but inside, a tightness coiled in his chest. The weight of knowing he would have to protect her from a world she didn't know was falling apart. Celine wasn't at breakfast. Again. She hadn't come home until nearly 3 a.m., slipping into bed with the careful quiet of someone who believed silence erased guilt. Ethan had felt the mattress dip, smelled the sharp floral of her perfume, heard the faint buzz of a text notification she didn't answer. "Big night, babe," she had mumbled before rolling over. This morning, Ethan didn't ask where she was headed, and she didn't offer. After Nova was dropped at school, Ethan returned home, the silence now a living thing stretching through the halls. He walked into his home office, shut the door, and stood for a moment in the middle of the room. Breathe, in, out. Then, calmly, he picked up his phone and dialed Ellis Varon. "Ellis," Ethan said, voice low, "I need everything you can get on Celine, today." Ellis didn't ask why. "Understood," came the steady reply. Ellis had been with Ethan for over 15 years. Officially, he was head of corporate security for Cole Biotech. Unofficially, he was the man Ethan trusted with the things he couldn't bring to boardrooms or lawyers. Ellis moved like a ghost, clean, quiet, thorough. By noon, Ethan's inbox pinged. Preliminary file attached. He opened it, the screen casting a pale light over his face. There they were. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, car service logs, photographs. Celine and Core at dinner. Celine and Core leaving the Sunset Tower. Celine and Core at a boutique hotel Ethan didn't even know she knew about. But it was the messages that hit harder. Encrypted chats, scrubbed phone records, side-channel communication Core thought was clever. Ellis's team had cracked it within hours. Celine. He has no idea. Keep playing it cool. Core. I want to smash that company from the inside out. Celine. We will. Soon. Ethan sat back in his chair, the weight pressing into his chest like a stone. This wasn't just about sex. It was about betrayal. It was about ambition. It was about his wife partnering with someone she thought could take what Ethan had built. And then Ellis's voice came on the line. You need to see this next part. Varon Holt. The name dropped like a blade. Ethan knew him, of course. Everyone in Los Angeles's venture capital circles knew Varon. Tall, meticulously dressed, openly gay, magnetic in a way that made people lean in without realizing they were giving something up. Varon wasn't just a player in the tech space. He was the player, and Core Wild was his protege. Celine had been a fool if she thought Core loved her. Core was Varon's lover. Always had been. Ellis's voice was calm but edged with tension. Core's been feeding Varon insider details on Cole Biotech for months. Your wife's helping. This isn't an affair. It's coordinated corporate sabotage. Ethan exhaled sharply, fingers pressing into his temples. And the baby? He asked. Ellis hesitated. We pulled records from her cloud backups. There's a prenatal test filed under an alias. Ethan didn't want to ask, but he had to. Who's the father? Ellis's voice dropped. Core. Ethan closed his eyes. His breathing slowed deliberately, a technique he'd perfected in boardrooms and negotiations where the stakes were life-changing. But nothing had prepared him for this. For 20 years, he'd been the man who fixed things. Deals, contracts, crises. He handled them all, but this wasn't a business deal. This was his life. his marriage, his child. Or, as it turned out, not his child. When he opened his eyes, the room looked the same. The framed degrees on the wall, the polished shelves, the photo of Celine and Nova smiling at last year's charity gala. But something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't holding together a marriage. He was preparing for a war. That evening, Celine breezed into the house, sunlight kissing the high bones of her face. She was wearing a white silk blouse tucked into tailored pants, her hair pulled back into a glossy ponytail. She looked fresh, collected, the perfect image of a woman balancing family and ambition. "Hey, babe," she said lightly, setting her purse down on the counter. "Everything okay?" Ethan turned, a slight smile touching his lips. "Fine. How was your meeting?" "Oh, Celine laughed, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Just the usual. So many moving parts." "We'll figure it out." She didn't notice the way he watched her, not with suspicion, but with something colder, more removed. The kind of gaze a surgeon gives a tumor before making the first cut. At dinner, Nova prattled about school. Celine smiled, kissed Ethan's cheek, poured another glass of wine. By midnight, when Celine slid into bed beside him, Ethan lay awake, eyes open, heart steady. Her breathing softened into sleep, the scent of wine on her breath. He stared at the ceiling. The gap between them, once filled with love, now held only silence. The next morning, Ethan moved with quiet precision. Nova to school, phone calls to legal counsel, meetings rescheduled, documents prepared. Ellis's team uncovered more. Varen's upcoming acquisition plans, Core's financial dependencies, Celine's siphoned personal accounts, but it was the small things that hurt most. The text Celine had sent Core during Nova's school recital. "Bored out of my mind. Wish you were here." The dinner reservations Ethan had made for their anniversary, canceled 2 hours before because Celine claimed she had a migraine, but was at a rooftop bar with Core, laughing under string lights. The weekend Nova had cried when her mother missed her swim meet. Each piece was a pin driven deeper until Ethan no longer bled. He crystallized. That night, standing in the study again, Ethan held his phone in his palm. Ellis's voice came through. "Everything's ready." Ethan spoke quietly. "Start the next phase." He hung up. In the reflection of the window, he saw himself, sharply tailored, dark-eyed, his face older than it was last month, last year, not broken, refined, focused. Celine thought she had been playing a game. She didn't know she was on a battlefield. By the end of the week, Ethan had prepared his opening moves. His legal team had drafted preliminary custody filings. Ellis's cyber experts were embedding trace markers in corporate communications to track any further leaks. Bankers were ready to freeze joint accounts on Ethan's signal. Celine came home late again, breezing through the door with that same airy charm, kissing Nova goodnight like nothing was wrong. But Ethan watched her, every movement, every lie, every mask she slipped on without thinking. He no longer wondered if he could save their marriage. He no longer wondered if he should. The only thing Ethan wondered now was how long it would take for Celine to realize she had been outplayed. On Friday night, Celine curled up on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, laughing softly at something Core had texted. Ethan sat across from her, Nova asleep upstairs, the house quiet. "Celine," he said casually, voice low. She looked up, slightly startled. "Yes?" He smiled faintly. "I booked us dinner tomorrow." She blinked. "Oh, that's unexpected." "Where?" "The Biltmore." Her eyes lit up with momentary surprise. That's nice." She hesitated, then smiled, leaning forward slightly. Ethan studied her, head tilted. eyes cool. Just you and me, he added. To talk. Celine faltered. For the first time, Ethan saw something flicker in her eyes. Something unsure, something almost afraid. Sure, she said quickly. Of course. Ethan leaned back, his smile never touching his eyes. Celine thought tomorrow would be dinner. She didn't know it would be the beginning of the end. The Biltmore was everything Celine adored. Marble floors, velvet banquettes, champagne that never stopped pouring, and the flicker of candles reflected in polished glass. Ethan had booked the private table by the window, the one she always bragged about to her friends, the one usually reserved for studio heads and visiting royalty. She arrived late, not wildly late, just late enough to make him wait. When Celine swept in, Ethan rose to greet her, masking the clean, cold edge of his focus under a smooth, polite smile. She kissed his cheek lightly, the way you'd greet a business partner, not a husband. Her perfume clung too sharp, too sweet. Sorry, traffic, she murmured, sliding into the chair across from him, slipping off her blazer to reveal a silk camisole underneath. This place looks gorgeous tonight. Ethan folded his hands lightly on the table. It does. She glanced at him, hesitant for a heartbeat, then flashed the bright, rehearsed smile that had dazzled boardrooms and magazine shoots alike. So, what's this about? She asked, voice lilting as she reached for the wine menu. Us. Celine laughed softly, as if deflecting tension. Ethan, honey, don't be so serious. Can we just have a nice night? Ethan tilted his head, studied her. Sure. A nice night. He let the words settle, smooth and unhurried, while Celine filled the air with nervous chatter. A new client, a potential deal, how much Core had helped her with networking these past months. At the name, Ethan's mouth quirked slightly. Core. Celine paused, a flicker of something passing across her face. Yeah, Core. You've met him, right? At the gala? I remember. She sipped her wine too quickly, fingers tapping lightly against the stem. Ethan watched her without blinking. Celine, do you love him? The question landed so softly it didn't sound like a bomb, but Celine's hand stilled. Excuse me? She said, a shaky laugh catching in her throat. Do you love him? Ethan repeated, voice low, even. Or are you just helping him gut my company? The mask slipped. For the briefest second, Celine's face hardened, calculating, but she caught herself, rearranged her features into wide-eyed innocence. Ethan, that's crazy. What are you talking about? Ellis pulled the records this morning, Ethan murmured, leaning back, casual. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, prenatal DNA tests. Celine's breath hitched. Her fingers clenched the napkin. For the first time, Ethan saw her exactly as she was. Not the woman he had married, but the woman she had become. Ambitious, restless, cracked from the inside. She reached across the table, voice shaking with just enough performance. Ethan, listen, we've been under a lot of pressure. I've made mistakes, but this... He smiled faintly. No need, Celine. He stood, slowly, smoothing down the sleeves of his suit jacket. We're done. Celine sat frozen, mouth open, words dying in her throat as he left. Outside, the air was sharp with winter bite. The sky above West Hollywood, a haze of light and haze. Ethan dialed Ellis. Start phase 2. Ellis's voice was clipped. Understood. Phase 2 was not rage. It was strategy. Core Wilde believed himself untouchable. He strolled through the lobby of his West Hollywood high-rise, phone in hand, attention fixed on texts from Celine and Varen Holt, unaware of the quiet ripples tightening around him. Ethan had fed Core a string of carefully crafted, plausible but false details over the past week. Whispers of an acquisition in Berlin, a supposedly fragile FDA approval window, an internal restructuring Core could spin into public instability. Core had rushed everything to Varen. The bait was set. Varen Holt, billionaire, kingmaker, shadow player in every tech circle that mattered, was already preparing the next phase. Media leaks, investor pressure, backroom whispers designed to chip at Cole Biotech's valuation. But Varen had one blind spot. He assumed Ethan was just a scientist with money. He didn't realize Ethan was a man raised on discipline, calculation, and unshakable patience. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office as Ellis delivered the latest. Core moved the Berlin story to Varen last night. Ethan nodded once. Let it run. Ellis hesitated. There's another piece. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Ellis passed him a folder. It contained emails, not about corporate sabotage, but about Core's real role. He's been with Varen for years, Ellis said quietly. Celine was never more than a tool. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, not from shock, from cold, bitter recognition. Celine had thought she was choosing passion over boredom, but she'd been a pawn in someone else's power game all along. By Thursday, the first headlines broke. Rumors swirled of instability at Cole Biotech, sudden executive shakeups, whispered international deals, anonymous sources tipping off reporters. Ethan sat calmly in his office as the storm churned. His legal team finalized Nova's custody filing. His bankers froze the joint accounts. His corporate comms team quietly prepared the truth, evidence packages, whistleblower testimonies, recordings Ellis's team had gathered, all ready to surface when the moment was right. And then, on Friday night, the invitation arrived. Varen Holt's private gala. Ethan almost laughed when he read it. Varen was staging his own show of dominance. Press, celebrities, investors, influencers. The event meant to crown him king of Los Angeles tech. Ethan accepted. When he walked into Varen's Hollywood Hills mansion, the crowd parted instinctively. He was the man everyone whispered about, the subject of the week's headlines, the one they were all watching to see if he'd crack. Celine was there, of course, radiant, icy, standing near Core, her hand brushing his arm with practiced ease. Core smirked when he saw Ethan. Varen approached smoothly, smile sharp as a blade. "Ethan Cole," he said warmly, extending a hand. Ethan took it, meeting his gaze steadily. "Varen Holt." For a moment they stood like two chess masters across a board, one believing himself steps ahead, the other already knowing how the game would end. Celine approached cautiously later, Core trailing her like a shadow. "Ethan," she murmured, voice soft. "Maybe we should talk." Ethan sipped his drink, smile cool. "About what?" Celine faltered. Core chuckled. Varen, from across the room, watched with faint amusement. Ethan leaned in just enough to murmur, "Enjoy the night." Then he turned, leaving them standing in the middle of the room, unsure whether they'd just won or lost. At midnight, Ellis's message came through. "All set. You give the word." Ethan stood on the balcony, the city spread glittering below. He breathed in the cold air, feeling not rage, not grief, but an odd, deep calm. "Do it," he said. By dawn, the dominoes fell. The leaked instability stories were traced back, not to Cole Biotech, but to Varen's camp. Anonymous tips and forensic trails Ellis's team had planted led directly to Core. By afternoon, Core's role in falsifying financial documents leaked. By evening, Varen's top-tier investors began pulling out. By nightfall, Celine's name surfaced in the chatter, the ambitious wife feeding confidential details to her lover. But the biggest hit was still coming. Ethan's legal team filed for full custody of Nova, citing parental negligence, financial misconduct, and prenatal fraud. And for the first time in years, Ethan went to bed and slept. Not because it was over, but because the hardest part was done. He had stopped pretending to be the man Celine wanted, and now he was only the man Nova needed. The morning after Varen Holt's gala broke across Los Angeles like a cracked mirror. At 7 a.m., headlines screamed from every device. Coal biotech scandal tied to rival VC firm, and leaked docs point to corporate espionage ring. Core Wild, Varen Holt at center. Ethan Cole sat in his Bel Air office, the sun barely slicing through the blinds, coffee cooling untouched at his elbow. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, held the steady focus of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. Across the room, Ellis Varen stood quietly, tablet in hand. "Celine's phone's been blowing up since 5 a.m., Ellis said, voice neutral. Core's gone underground. Varen's lawyer is issuing blanket denials. Ethan gave a small nod, fingers tapping once, twice on the armrest. And Celine herself? Ellis's mouth tugged slightly at the corner. Cracked. Celine Varelli had been unraveling since the moment the first news alert lit up her phone. She'd woken late, unusual for her, hair tangled, still in last night's cocktail dress, makeup smudged under her eyes. Her inbox was a war zone. Dozens of emails from Core, half a dozen from Varen, and more than one from media contacts trying to get her side before the morning cycle. She stumbled downstairs, eyes darting to the kitchen. Ethan wasn't there. Nova was already at school. Her hands shook as she poured coffee. For the first time, her perfectly curated world felt off balance. She called Core. Voicemail. She texted Varen. No response. She tried to steady her breath. When Ethan returned that afternoon, calm, pressed shirt, silver watch gleaming, she rushed to him. "We need to talk," she blurted. Ethan set his keys down carefully. "We do." For a moment, she softened. "I'm sorry, Ethan. Things got out of hand. Core, it wasn't what you think. We can fix this." Ethan tilted his head, studying her as if she were a problem to be solved. "Celine," he said softly, "you're not the one I'm worried about." That evening, at the downtown Beverly Hills charity gala, the one Varen had handpicked to cement his place among the social elite, the room hummed with tension. Core Wild arrived late, pale, sunglasses on indoors, his usual smirk replaced by tight-lipped silence. Varen floated through the crowd like a man in control, shaking hands, charming donors, his lawyers on speed dial. Celine arrived flustered but radiant, pushing her way through photographers with forced smiles. What none of them noticed, what none of them could have imagined, was Ethan Cole standing at the back of the ballroom, a drink in hand, watching them with a quiet, chilling stillness. Ellis stood beside him, murmuring into his earpiece. 3 minutes. At precisely 9:15 p.m., as the gala host raised a champagne glass to toast the night's fundraising total, the enormous LED screen behind the stage flickered. The room hushed. Images appeared, text messages, bank transfers, encrypted chats, flashing across the screen in sharp, brutal detail. "We'll gut Ethan's company from the inside. Varen's already lining up investors to jump ship. Once Ethan's out, Core and I can run this city." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Varen froze mid-sip, eyes narrowing. Core went sheet white, reaching for his phone. Celine, standing dead center, perfectly lit, stared up, mouth open, trembling, and Ethan, still at the back, sipped once, then set his glass down. The room exploded. Within 30 minutes, media vans clustered outside the venue. By midnight, Investors were pulling out of Varen's funds. By dawn, Core's penthouse was under quiet foreclosure review, and by 10 a.m., Ethan's lawyers filed for emergency custody of Nova, citing parental negligence, public scandal, and marital fraud. Celine stumbled home late, hair in disarray, phone buzzing endlessly. She found Ethan in the living room, sitting in the dark. She froze. "Ethan, please," she began, her voice catching. I didn't." He stood, slowly. "The prenup is void," he said quietly. "The accounts are locked. The house is mine." Celine's hands flew to her mouth, her knees buckling slightly. "And Nova?" she whispered. "She stays with me." For the first time she saw it. Not anger, not revenge, but something harder, colder. Finality. She stepped forward, tears brimming. "Ethan, we were happy once," she choked. He tilted his head slightly. "We were, until you decided we weren't." Across the city, Core sat alone in his penthouse, watching as his bank accounts drained in real time. His phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, lawyers, burned contacts. But the only name he wanted to see, Varen Holt, had gone silent. Desperation set in. Core dialed, waited, dialed again. Voicemail. He tried Celine. No answer. When he looked out over the glittering skyline, the city he had once thought he'd own, Core understood. He was over. Varen, meanwhile, was already sealing off his bunker. His top lawyers worked through the night. Statements were drafted, blame shifted, alliances tested. But no one wanted to stand next to a man with blood on his hands. By morning, Varen stood alone on his mansion balcony, watching reporters gather at his gate, his glass of whiskey untouched on the table. He checked his phone. Celine, gone. Core, disgraced. Investors, fleeing. For the first time in a decade, Varen Holt realized his name. His power wasn't untouchable. And the man who had done it to him hadn't even needed to raise his voice. Ethan spent that night in Nova's room, quietly sitting by her bed as she slept. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, watched the slow, steady rise of her chest. Here, in this small circle of peace, was what mattered. Not the money, not the company, not even the revenge. Nova was safe, and for the first time in months, so was Ethan. Celine sat alone in the guest room, staring at her phone. Her social media was in flames, hundreds of messages, thousands of unfollows, brands pulling sponsorships, whispers of homewrecker CEO floating through the media. She scrolled back to old pictures, her wedding day, Nova's first birthday, anniversary trips with Ethan. She saw herself, but she barely recognized the woman she had become. Her fingers hovered over the call button. Ethan. She wanted to say she was sorry. She wanted to say she had been stupid. But she knew, deep down, that it was too late. Across town, Core sat curled on his leather couch, the noise from his phone finally silenced. The headlines had turned him into a meme. #fraudboy, #pawn of Varen, #scandal, in sneakers. His phone vibrated once, not from Celine, not from Varen, from his building management. Notice of foreclosure. Core Wild, who had once laughed through every room he entered, felt his throat tighten. For the first time, the room felt too big, too cold, too empty. Back in the Hollywood Hills, Varen Holt sat under a brutal sunrise, sharp light catching the lines in his face he usually masked in perfect lighting. He dialed Core, disconnected. He tried Celine, no answer. He set his phone down, folded his hands, and for the first time, the man who had built an empire on controlling others realized he had underestimated the quiet man in the room. Ethan Cole hadn't fought him. He had simply waited and watched. And now, he had won. Ethan Cole stood in the entryway of his Bel Air villa, the afternoon light sharp against the glass walls. The house was silent except for the faint tick of the clock in the kitchen and the occasional rustle of the lemon trees outside. He watched the gate camera feed on his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Celine was pulling into the driveway. Her silver SUV glided to a stop, and for a moment she stayed inside, hands on the wheel, eyes closed. Ethan waited. When she finally stepped out, she was dressed carefully. Navy blazer, dark jeans, the serious but approachable look she always curated when managing crises. Except this time, she wasn't walking into a boardroom. She was walking into the home she was about to lose. He met her at the door, stepping aside silently as she brushed past him. Celine turned in the foyer, voice tight. "Ethan, we need to talk." He folded his arms, one eyebrow lifting. "Talk." Look, I know this looks bad." Ethan's voice was quiet but final. "Stop." She flinched. "You don't get to frame this. You don't get to spin it." His gaze locked on hers. "The prenup is void. The accounts are frozen. The house is mine. Nova stays with me." Celine's mouth worked soundlessly, fingers curling slightly at her sides. "You can't. You wouldn't," she whispered. "I already did." She staggered back half a step. For the first time, the reality hit. Not just headlines, not just social fallout, not just gossip. This was the end. Across town, Cor Wilde sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the foreclosure notice on his phone. The headlines had been merciless. Fraud, lies, and lovers. Cor Wilde at center of scandal. His sponsors had pulled out. His startup job had evaporated, and his sleek penthouse apartment, once the stage for his endless self-promotion, was now an echo chamber of humiliation. He tried calling Celine. No answer. He tried calling Varen. Straight to voicemail. His Twitter mentions were a disaster. Memes, insults, betrayals. Hashtag pawn of Varen. Hashtag Celine's fall guy. Cor ran a shaky hand through his hair, cold sweat prickling his skin. For the first time in years, no one was answering his calls. Not lovers, not mentors, not friends. He was alone. In the Hollywood Hills, Varen Holt sat in his glass-walled study, fingers steepled under his chin. His top-tier legal team was scrambling to control the media, but the damage was accelerating. Major investors had pulled out within 24 hours, political allies were distancing themselves, and corporate partners were issuing statements of surprise and concern. But it was the LGBTQ+ business community's reaction that cut deepest. They weren't condemning Varen's sexuality. They were condemning his abuse of power. His pattern of seduction, manipulation, and exploitation had caught up to him, and no one was shielding him this time. A text came in from an old associate. "You're poisoned now. We're done." Varen exhaled, closing his eyes. For the first time, the man who had orchestrated 1,000 backroom deals felt the walls closing in. Back in Bel Air, Celine sat on the edge of the bed she once shared with Ethan, her hands trembling as she tried to dial her way out of the hole. "Ethan, please," she tried again, voice shaking. "We can work through this." He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze cool. "Celine, you cheated." It wasn't. You betrayed." Her voice cracked. "I was lonely." Ethan let out a quiet laugh. No humor, just bitter recognition. "I was right there," he said softly. "For 20 years. Celine's eyes filled, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. "And Nova?" she whispered. His expression hardened. "She stays." You signed your rights away the moment you put her second. Celine covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking in silent sobs. Ethan watched for a moment, then turned and left the room. He didn't slam the door. He didn't need to. The next day, Ethan stood at his lawyer's office, signing the final documents. Full custody, asset control, divorce filings, and a restraining order against any further corporate interference. The paperwork was cold, clinical, but when the last signature hit the page, something inside him settled. Not peace, but closure. Cor, meanwhile, sat in a darkened apartment, blinds drawn, the last of his liquor swirling in a glass. His phone vibrated with a single message, from Varen. Don't contact me again. Cor closed his eyes, the weight of his failures crashing in. He had played at power. He had underestimated who he was dealing with. And now, he was nothing. At the same time, in his fortress-like mansion, Varen watched his empire disintegrate in real time. Lawsuits piled up. Criminal investigations loomed. Partners ghosted him. His name was no longer whispered with respect. It was spat with disgust. Varen poured himself a drink, staring out over the city he had once ruled. Somewhere out there, Ethan Cole was sitting in a quiet house holding his daughter's hand, and Varen, the man who had thought himself untouchable, was watching everything slip away. That evening, Ethan and Nova sat on the back patio, the ocean breeze carrying in the smell of lemon and salt. Nova leaned against him, her head tucked under his arm. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Yes, Angel." "Is Mommy okay?" Ethan's throat tightened for a moment. He kissed the top of her head. "She's finding her way." Nova was quiet, small fingers curling around his. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. Ethan closed his eyes, pulling her closer. "So am I." Late that night, Celine sat alone in a hotel room, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Ethan and Nova at the beach, family dinners, holidays. She wiped at her eyes, mascara smudging at the corners, her breath hiccuping in her chest. Her fingers hovered over Ethan's contact. She wanted to call. She wanted to say she was sorry. But she knew, really knew, that sorry wasn't enough. Across town, Cor sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing. He had texted everyone. No replies. He had posted a carefully worded apology. No one cared. He was no longer the rising star. He was no longer the seducer, the insider, the game changer. He was just another cautionary tale. Varen stood alone on his balcony, whiskey in hand, watching the world move on without him. He had spent decades mastering control. He had lost everything in a matter of days. And the man who had done it had never raised his voice, never made a scene. Ethan Cole had simply waited and watched. And when the moment was right, he had ended the game, completely, quietly, and with surgical precision. Ethan stood at Nova's door that night, watching her sleep. For the first time in months, his heart didn't race, his mind didn't spin, his fists weren't clenched. He was tired. But he was free. Celine was gone. Cor was ruined. Varen was crumbling. And Ethan? Ethan still had everything that mattered. Nova, his company, his name, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that sometimes you don't have to destroy your enemies. You just have to let them destroy themselves. Ethan Cole sat in the glass-walled corner of his office, eyes on the horizon, where the pale gold of sunset washed over Los Angeles like a tired breath. His fingers rested lightly on the arm of the chair, but his phone, turned face down on the desk, pulsed silently with incoming calls. He wasn't interested. For the first time in months, maybe years, Ethan felt no pull toward the chaos. Celine, Cor, Varen. The firestorm they had tried to pull him into was collapsing without his hand. Ellis Varon stepped quietly into the office, closing the door behind him. "It's done," Ellis said softly. "Varon's board has resigned. His assets are frozen pending investigation. Core's lawyers filed his statement of withdrawal." Celine's publicist released a statement, but no one's buying it. Ethan gave a single nod, his jaw tightening only slightly. "And Nova?" "Already at your sister's, safe. She's playing in the backyard, painting rocks." Ethan exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. That was all he needed to hear. Across town, Celine Varelli sat in a hotel room that smelled faintly of bleach and despair. Her phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand, texts, calls, media requests. But she sat still, legs folded under her, eyes fixed on the far wall. She had crafted a post for Instagram, a photo of a sunset, a caption about healing, a string of hashtags about resilience. She hadn't hit post. The comments were no longer kind. The sponsors were no longer calling. She'd tried reaching Ethan twice that day, once with a text, once with a voicemail. Neither had been answered. She squeezed her eyes shut, fingers pressing against her temples. In the silence, the weight of what she'd thrown away came crashing in. Core Wilde paced the narrow strip of his apartment, barefoot, hair disheveled. The luxury furniture looked strangely hollow under the weight of reality. He was no longer the brilliant upstart, the insider, the one everyone wanted at their table. He was the punchline. His phone vibrated. He snatched it up, but it was only another notification. An article dissecting his downfall. He dropped the phone, pressing his fists into his eyes. Varon had stopped answering. Celine had ghosted, and no one else cared. He had always been someone's accessory, and now he was disposable. At the Hollywood Hills mansion, Varon Holt watched from his office window as another luxury car was towed from his driveway. His empire was collapsing piece by piece, and there was nothing elegant about it. He'd tried making calls that afternoon, allies, influencers, politicians, but every conversation ended in polite evasion or blunt rejection. "Sorry, Varon, we can't be involved right now. You understand, don't you? It's just business." He had built his life around control, seduction, influence, and now no one was left to be seduced. He sipped his whiskey slowly, his reflection in the glass looking older, sharper, more mortal than he remembered. For the first time, he wondered if the man who had undone him, Ethan Cole, had ever needed to raise a finger at all. Ethan arrived home just after 8, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the appliances. He walked through the rooms slowly, touching the back of the couch, the edge of the kitchen counter, the framed photo of Nova on the side table. This was his, this life, this peace. When his phone finally rang, he let it vibrate twice before lifting it. "Celine." He answered. There was a pause on the other end, then a soft, trembling breath. "Ethan," she whispered. "Please, I just need to talk." Ethan's fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the table. "I'm listening," he said, voice calm. "I'm sorry," Celine choked. "I was stupid. God, I don't know what I was doing." Ethan closed his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, without anger, without heat, he answered. "I know." Celine's breath hitched. "Is there any way we can—" "No." His voice was quiet, but the word was a stone. On the other end, Celine's breath broke into small, shaking pieces. Ethan waited. Then, gently, he said, "Take care of yourself, Celine." And he ended the call. The next morning, Core Wilde's name trended on every platform. Photos of him leaving his apartment in sweatpants and sunglasses, face pale, head down. Commentators dissected his fall from tech darling to disgraced scandal figure. Former friends posted vague tweets about trusting the wrong people. His agent cut him loose. By nightfall, he sat in the dark, a half-empty bottle beside him, scrolling through posts he could no longer control. He had been so sure he was on the rise. He had no idea how far the fall would go. Varen, meanwhile, sat through a marathon legal meeting, his top attorney laying out the probabilities. Fraud investigations, civil suits, loss of his license to operate. Varen kept his face still, but inside the walls had already cracked. For years he'd believed himself untouchable. For years he'd used people like weapons, like shields. Now, stripped of the stage, stripped of the applause, he was just a man with debts. He thought of Ethan Cole, the quiet husband he'd underestimated, the man he'd never bothered to study. And for the first time he understood. He hadn't been outplayed. He'd been outgrown. That night, Ethan tucked Nova into bed, brushing her hair back gently. "Daddy?" she murmured, sleepily. "Yes, Angel." "Is Mommy okay?" Ethan's throat tightened. He kissed her forehead. "She will be." Nova's eyes fluttered closed, small hand curling around his. Ethan sat with her until her breath deepened, the small, soft sound of trust. When he finally stood, he moved through the house slowly, feeling each room, each space, each moment. This was what was left. And it was enough. Across the city, Celine sat on a hotel balcony, wrapped in a blanket, her phone silent in her lap. She scrolled through old photos, birthdays, holidays, quiet mornings. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She had chased something glittering, and now she was left with glass. Kor sat in his empty apartment, head bowed, knowing no one was coming to save him. Varen stared out over the city, the whiskey in his glass untouched, the empire he'd built nothing but smoke. And Ethan Cole? He was home, with his daughter, with his company, with his peace. Not because he had destroyed them, but because they had destroyed themselves. The ocean air rolled in soft and cold as Ethan Cole stood barefoot on the deck of his Malibu home, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. Below, Nova ran along the beach, her laughter carrying faintly on the wind. The morning sun was barely lifting over the horizon, casting streaks of gold and pale pink across the sky, the kind of quiet beauty Los Angeles rarely allowed. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, just to feel it. The calm, the peace. The war was over. Inside, his phone buzzed where he'd left it on the kitchen counter. He didn't move to answer. He knew what it would be. Lawyers finalizing details, media teams asking for comment, investors reaffirming their loyalty after the storm had passed. There was no need to rush. For the first time in years, his life belonged entirely to him. Celine Virelli sat in a 2-bedroom rental in West Hollywood, legs tucked under her on a worn gray couch. Her once flawless Instagram had gone silent for days. The last post, a carefully edited sunset shot, sat abandoned under a flood of comments, some sympathetic, most not. She scrolled anyway. She scrolled through old photos, her wedding to Ethan, Nova's birth, gala nights, vacation mornings, laughing over wine, clinking glasses, kissing cheeks. Her hand trembled as she set the phone down. She had called Ethan once more the night before. He hadn't picked up. In the silence, Celine felt the shape of her loss. Not the money, not the house, not the deals, the family, the man, the little girl she used to kiss goodnight. She squeezed her eyes shut, curling tighter into herself. She had made her choice, and now she was alone with it. Across the city, Kor Wilde sat in a dark apartment, the blinds drawn against the midday sun. The headlines had stopped naming him. Now he was just a footnote in Varen Holt's implosion. His friends had disappeared. His agents had fled. The deals were gone. He tried sometimes to write a post, to craft some clever apology or reinvention, but the words stuck in his throat, cold and small. He had thought he was rising. He had been falling the whole time. Varenholt sat at a long conference table, his lawyers murmuring around him, papers spread like wreckage. His empire was gone, not in some fiery collapse, but in the slow, grinding retreat of power, the kind where calls go unanswered, where once loyal allies quietly shift away, where the invitations stop coming. Varen stared at the marble wall, feeling the weight settle across his shoulders. He had thought money and charm would shield him. He had forgotten about quiet men like Ethan Cole, the ones who watched, the ones who waited, the ones who outlived you. That evening, Ethan sat on the back deck, Nova curled under his arm with a blanket wrapped around her small shoulders. They watched the last of the sun melt into the ocean, waves pulling against the shore with a rhythm as old as time. "Daddy," Nova whispered, "are we going to stay here forever?" Ethan kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening slightly. "For as long as you want, Angel." Nova sighed softly, her head resting against his chest. In that moment, Ethan felt something ease inside him, a knot unspooling, a weight lifting. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. It was freedom. It was his life, rebuilt, quiet and whole. Inside the house, his phone flashed again. Celine had left a voicemail. Ethan didn't listen. There was no more anger in him, no more bitterness. Just a simple, clean silence. Celine would go on, or not. Core would rebuild, or disappear. Varen would face his charges, or flee from them. Ethan no longer cared. He had Nova. He had his work. He had himself. That was enough. Late that night, under the stars, Ethan stood alone on the beach, the waves cold around his feet. He thought of everything he had lost. He thought of everything he had kept. And as the tide pulled softly at the sand, Ethan Cole smiled. Small, quiet, unshakable. He had walked through fire. He had come out whole. And now, he was finally free. In life, the deepest betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from those we once trusted to stand beside us, not behind us with a knife. But within betrayal, there is a quiet truth. Loss strips away illusion. It forces a reckoning, not only with others, but with ourselves. What we think will break us often reveals what we were always strong enough to survive. Not every wound needs revenge. Some only need distance. Not every battle demands a fight. Some are won by walking away. There's a power in quiet endurance, in holding to your values when the ground shifts beneath you. There's peace in learning that you cannot control who stays or who leaves, only who you become in the aftermath. In the end, survival is not about outlasting others. It's about outlasting the version of yourself that believed you weren't whole without them. Thank you for being here and sharing in this story. If it moved you, surprised you, or made you reflect, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with heart, resilience, and truth. Until next time, stay strong.